The Immortal Constellation, written by Edith Balogh, translated by Barbara Dunchazi and Edith Simon, read by Edith Simon. Chapter 6. Our Often Debated Feelings. Quote by Bruce Lipton. You know why it's hard to be happy? It's because we refuse to let go of the things that makes us sad. We have already talked about the mind, the body, atoms, the universe, etc., and reached one of the most important topics, if we can discern importance, which is our emotional world. Ultimately, having the ability to feel is an elemental part of being human. Feelings, in reality, are nothing else but vibrations which are emitted from our body. I will just refer to them as this because I do not wish to delve too deep into their scientific explanation, for that is not the crucial part here. What I mean by emotional vibrations is the connecting energy between nature's invisible dimensions. It's a different measurement which operates under different rules, and it requires a different type of communication from what we know. We actually know it and use it, just not consciously. We do not realize that emotional vibrations are what our feelings really are. They are the binding force on various levels, mediating our communication with the universe. We can refer to it both in a physical and spiritual sense. We emit these vibrations as well as receive the ones which are coming from the external world. They are the unspoken language of the universe. The human body, breaking away from its physical form, connects with the spiritual and non-matter energy levels. This is where we break away from the material world, or this is how we say it, but in reality, this is not a separation, actually the opposite. This is what connects the visible and invisible worlds. These same feelings govern and command our body's inner processes. Our emotions are in direct connection to our brain's and body's various automatic functions, which will switch our system's different chemical processes on and off. Through their means, hormones and enzymes are produced, which the functioning of our organs and cells are dependent on, including our brain. The question is, what kind of feelings begin this entire process? If they were positive feelings, all will proceed in a positive direction. It will build up and enhance the body, as well as our outlook of the external world. If the feelings were negative, it acts as a tornado. It dismantles and devastates everything within and outwards. Even though positive and negative emotions may be subject to variation in relation to each person's subjective experience, the most straightforward way to explain is that whatever induces feelings of elevation, happiness, love, in other words, is in the direction of life, may be considered positive, and feelings which evoke the opposite, coming from fear, are negative and take us in the direction of disconnection. Every external and internal impulse compels a feeling that has thoughts and pictures connected to it. These are the inducing agents of emotions and vice versa. It is a circular cycle. That is why our thoughts are crucial, because one simple thought can evoke a feeling, and the longer we focus on that thought, the more intense the emotions will become. Through this, we can end up on a road to some unwelcome process. If we go a step further and we begin to visualize the thoughts we have and watch them play out as a motion picture in our mind, these can lead to enormous influences because by imagining them, our thoughts will intensify the vibrations of emotions within us. When we extract our thoughts by writing them down, it acts the same way, because it takes time to properly put the commotion of thoughts in our minds onto paper. It also causes us to concentrate and focus onto our thoughts and the emotions which follow them, as opposed to when they just run through our minds. When we utter these same thoughts out loud, the emotions and their partnering vibrations also become more forceful, because in this case, you are listening to your own voice, which helps solidify them. This is especially true if we are talking to someone. We put more effort into articulating our ideas. This results in more concentration, focus, and effort being put on the thought, therefore enhancing its corresponding emotions. It is virtually irrelevant in what form do we present an idea, which may have previously been a mere passing thought in the sea of the thousands we encounter in our minds every day. The important thing is that by projecting outwards in any of the previously mentioned ways, it will strengthen and define the feelings associated with it and strengthening the vibrations we emit. What matters is for us to understand that our thoughts, our physical sensations, and our emotions are deeply interconnected. They are induced by one another and are interdependent. In conclusion, it is irrelevant which point we start out from because we communicate with the language of emotions both outwards to the universe and inwards to our own bodies, and neither will understand our words, only the corresponding vibrations. Information intake, storage, and the automated process. A quote from Dr. Gabor Mate. In the real world, there is no nature versus nurture argument, only an infinitely complex and moment by moment interaction between genetic and environmental effects. All of the external impulses, sensations, and feelings which we receive from our external surrounding, any type of information, play a great influence on our thoughts. Consequently, our thoughts have an influence on our feelings, and this is what dictates our biochemical processes. These go on to affect our entire bodies, including how our brain functions, which will then make the circle complete by influencing our thoughts. Anything can jumpstart this close-knit interdependent process, and most of the time, it will run its course without us even noticing or being aware of the cause. Most of the time, we do not know what and how it happens, and do not stand a chance at bringing it to a halt. This entire process plays out on the outskirts of our consciousness, and unless we familiarize ourselves with its functioning mechanism, things will continue to occur without us having any control over them. We do not notice any of this happening, with the exception of the end result, which is a negative state of being characterized by headaches, anxiety, inner turmoil, and all kinds of illnesses. The only way we stand a chance against this is realizing this process and consciously defending ourselves. In the brain, the heart, and in the spinal fluid, there are neurons, sometimes referred to as nerve cells, which connect to one another to form a neural network. By today's scientific standing, what stands certain is that information intake and storage does not occur primarily in the cytoplasm, the small gel-like substance residing between the cell membrane holding all the cell's internal substructures. Neither does it occur in the nucleus. Rather, at the connection point of the neurons, this is referred to as the synapses. Synapses allow neurons to pass an electrical or chemical signal to another cell. At the same time, these cell-connecting synapses create the brain's most sensitive neural highway, which reacts to all inner and external stimuli or change. At the synaptic cleft, the gap between the two adjacent points of the neuron and the next cell, chemical substances referred to as neurotransmitters, which are primarily either excitatory or inhibitory, get transmitted, sending signals from neurons to the target cell. There are 10 billion neurons, brain cells, in our body. Between each one, there are neurotransmitters responsible for transmitting messages from one cell to the next. This allows for a neural highway where our brain cells and our heart can talk to one another because, as I mentioned before, our heart and spinal fluid also possesses neurons. How you interpret external or internal stimuli, experience, emotion, and feel at the given time is governed by these neurotransmitters. If we receive the same external stimuli too often, or allot a great amount of time to one certain thought, it will form a routine neural pathway where certain nerve cells will connect more often and form a relationship with one another. The connection is established between two neurons as a result of repeated synaptic discharge by a certain thought or feeling which you devote a lot of time to and repeatedly comes back in your mind, or by triggers of the environment. If there was a certain way you were thinking previously and you stop, the connections already established in the neural networks will cease and their relationship will diminish. When we pay attention and closely interfere in a certain thought process we have, and do not allow this automated reaction to continue, we put a stop to that respective chemical reaction in our bodies. We halt the habitual discharge of the neurotransmitters and loosen their contact and relationship. If we can achieve this, we are no longer rendered exposed to our very nature and our automated programs. Concentration and focus are crucial. If we contribute enough time and effort on it, we can learn to take control of these internal processes and, consequently, of our lives. We switch from being mostly reactive creatures to being creative ones. If we can grasp and achieve the above, we can understand how the following example is possible. If we are lying in bed with our eyes closed and a thought springs from a distant memory and you shift your focus to it, you can evoke an entire spectrum of memories and emotions. Our body will react the same way as it did in the initial occurrence. This is because the identical biochemical processes will hit us and we will relive the feelings we felt appropriate to these memories. Of course, once we are already under the influence of these feelings, it will once again return to influence our thoughts. So, if we are speaking about a negative memory, we will relive the negative feelings associated with it, which will in turn sprout their own negative thoughts, and this is how we spiral downwards. The more often we evoke certain memories or thoughts, the more we strengthen the chemical connections in the neural networks of our brains and body. Our brain does not distinguish a difference between the immediate present or a memory brought forth from the past. The synapses occur in identical ways. There are no past tense or present tense neurons. There is only information which connects to each other and jumpstart a certain chain of events that influences the body, the brain, our thoughts and feelings. The only way we can defend ourselves against undesired automated processes which work against us is commanded consciousness. The world of our feelings. Quote from Greg Braden. We live in a world where everything is connected. We cannot longer think in terms of us and them when it comes to the consequences of the way we live. Today, it's all about we. So, what do we conclude? Are our feelings good or bad? In reality, they are neither good or bad, they are what we are. We can have feelings which are unpleasant to us, countless of this kind really. This is what we referred to previously as negative. Negative emotions always have an adverse effect on us, both mentally and physically. Simply put, they are destructive. Our positive emotions are sustaining and supporting the life process, and their effects are constructive. It would be aimless to begin listing feelings which are positive or negative, as it is such a wide range it is impossible to properly categorize them all. Compared to the vast scope of our emotional world, We have given dictionary definitions only to a few. As we come to a better understanding of this area, we will see that we universally suffer from a deficit of emotional cognition, and we live according to the belief that the few feelings we have categorized and labeled are the only ones we experience. Our emotional domain, or our world of emotions, is not so closely bordered and spreads out much wider into the horizon. Even though we possess a seemingly infinite emotional spectrum, most people operate with the understanding that they possess only the more intense ones, which are labeled and placed into a hierarchy. If we observe the two main starting points, it becomes easier to differentiate between the negative and positive feelings. We can say all emotions spring from one of two roots, either fear or love. Fear, in other words, is nothing else but the threat of disconnection, which is the direction of death, while love, on the other hand, is the awareness of being in unity, which is the direction of life. Behind all negative emotion, you can find fear. It may not be so straightforward or obvious at first, and may require some introspection, but upon a closer analysis of any number of emotions such as jealousy, envy, shame, anger, humiliation, and powerlessness, you can sense a subtle underlining of its fundamental driving force, which is none other than fear itself. We are jealous because we fear losing our partners, and we envy others because we fear inferiority. When put in enough effort, and very importantly, honesty towards ourselves and our emotions, we can see there are no exceptions. All of our negative emotions spring from fear and are destructive. On the other hand, when we turn our attention towards our positive emotions, we can sense their underlying force being love. Feelings such as acceptance, happiness, understanding, compassion, confidence, and peacefulness are all products of genuine love. The feeling of being accepted or accepting someone else is nurtured by the ability to bear love towards another. Happiness can be understood as one of the main manifestations of experiencing love in our lives. I encourage you to take the time to go through the range of positive emotions which are present in your life and dig down to their base, where I guarantee you will always find a form of love. When you pay attention to this, you will reach a better understanding and a sensorial immediacy with the effects it has on our mental and physical state. Emotions are stored and actualized through our biochemical processes. In our long-term memory, all of our feelings are stored away as chemical compounds. The universe's most advanced chemical laboratory is within our very bodies. Our endocrine system is a series of glands which secretes hormones directly into our bloodstream to regulate the body. It is a signal system similar to that of our nervous system, but with comparatively different effects and mechanisms. The hypothalamus is one part of our endocrine system, which we can picture as a storage place where chemical compounds accumulate, which corresponds to our various emotions. These compounds are called peptides, which are short, repeating structural units of amino acid links. We transform these protein structures found in the hypothalamus, peptides, into neuropeptides, small protein-like structures used by neurons to communicate with one another, and neurohormones, which corresponds to our regularly experienced emotional states. Every emotion resonating throughout our body possesses their respective chemical compound. When we receive positive or negative stimuli in our brain, the hypothalamus collects the appropriate peptides and sends it into our bloodstream, which is spread through the entire body. This translates into the emotional state we experience. All of the cells, which the body is composed of, have exterior receptors, and when a peptide reaches a cell, It connects to these receptors, imitating a key and a lock mechanism, which provides a signal to the cell. The receptor, which has a peptide connected to it, will affect the cell on any number of different ways. It will commence biochemical processes, which will establish a close connection and create changes in the cell center, the nucleus. One of the receptor's very important characteristic is that their sensitivity varies. If a receptor gets intensely bombarded enough with either chemicals produced internally or drugs we intake, it will shrink and become less sensitive or simply deadened. This means that keeping up this intense level of chemicals or drugs will build up a tolerance in our body, so that in order to reach the same intensity, we must systematically increase the dosage. Alcohol can be used as an example of this. If we do not consume any alcohol for a long period of time, even a small intake will suffice to feel its effects. On the other hand, if we regularly consume the same amount, over time the effects will significantly diminish. Therefore, we must consume more to reach the same state. If we do this long enough, our cells become dependent on the substance to the point that when they do not receive any, they will send signals of deficiency to the brain, and this is how addictions are born and nurtured. But this process does not only occur with the intake of external substances. The cells will also undergo the same process if we regularly bombard them with certain feelings in their chemical peptide form. When the cell divides, its successor will have formed much more receptors, especially designed to receive the same emotions or substances. On the other hand, its receptors dedicated to receiving vitamins, minerals, and nutrients necessary for the sustainment of its life diminishes. In conclusion, how could we be healthy if our very cells, let's say after 20 years of emotional turmoil, are incapable of taking in the necessary nutrients for the maintaining of its life, and consequently that of ours? All they have been trained to do is to concentrate their efforts on being ready to receive the bombardment of intense emotions. All of our cells, which require nourishment, all of our organs designated to the continuation of our bodily processes, therefore our life, are under the influence of the molecules of our feelings. Between them exists a continuous interdependence. Therefore, it is crucial we begin to place our emotional world under scrutiny and attempt to familiarize ourselves with it as much as possible. Our body's functioning is governed by our feelings. We must learn this language in order to properly communicate with it. In this sense, our feelings could be explained as simply internal biochemical processes, which is a communication system taking place within our body's spoken language. Even though an impulse we experience is translated into an emotion and then into a compound within our system. At the same time, we communicate outwards as well towards our external world in the same invisible sense. All our thoughts which get translated into feelings and their respective effects we radiate outwards on the appropriate frequency. These emotional frequencies, which our bodies emanate, will in turn affect our outside world. These frequencies are what those surrounding us can sense. We can witness this in animals, for an example, how dogs are able to sense their owners' moods changing despite having no other way of communication. We just simply do not pay attention, thus do not notice the effects our projected emotional state have on our surroundings as well as on ourselves. We radiate these intense emotional vibrations but are ignorant of either their detrimental or beneficial effects. Therefore, we may mope around in a depressed haze for a week, directly affecting and bringing down others around us, but most of the time we fail to notice what negative effects it is having on ourselves, never mind others. If we do pay attention, we can also witness the effects others have on us, whether they are positive or negative, without having to say a word. This is why it's so important to be conscious about our own emotions, because we affect each other in the same way, even if it is done unintentionally or unaware. We must not underestimate or undervalue the power of our thoughts and feelings. Their effects are constantly present, regardless whether we care or know about them. We give out a signal to our body, which it reacts to, which our body in turn passes on outwardly to our surroundings and the universe itself. Everyone behaves as both a transmitter and a receiver simultaneously. I believe if we wish to be responsible, conscious human beings, it is important for us to understand that we are not separated, autonomous, independent agents. Everything and everyone influences us, even if we do not wish to acknowledge it. We are an integral part of a greater unit where all elemental components possesses their own functions, but at the same time, as in all units, the parts are in an interconnected framework capable of mutually affecting one another. We can comprehend our emotions as feedback of how we fulfill our functions within the larger units we are part of. If we notice an abnormal process taking place within our body, which is indicated as pain or some other similar symptom, we must pay attention to the signals our body is trying to communicate, because it means there exists a problem somewhere. The same way we receive feedback from the greater so-called body of the larger unit that there is a problem with that, let's say, cell which we embody, that we are sick in a sense of this unity, and that we must become aware of it in order to become once more a functioning and sustainable part of it. To explain in a very simplistic way, if we have bad feelings, if we have negative thoughts, and we radiate them outward, all of the negative energy we project is detrimental for both ourselves and others, and for the whole. On the same count, if we feel happy, cheerful, active, energetic, and creative, we fulfill our purpose on all grounds, both for our own unit and in the greater unit's point of view. The power behind our habits. A quote from Greg Braden. Manifestation begins with the willingness to make room in our beliefs for something that supposedly doesn't exist. We create that something through the force of consciousness and awareness. The existence of feelings is neither good nor bad. Simply put, we ourselves are our feelings. It is through them that we communicate and maintain connections. Our emotions are parts of our bodies, necessary components for the sustainment of our life. They enrich and color our experiences. The only problem is dependency. When our actions are controlled by the deficiency of a certain emotional state and not by our conscious decision. Emotional dependence is not simply psychological, but biological. If we pay attention and understand the mechanisms behind it all, we will see that substance abuse uses the same receptor mechanisms positioned on a cell as our emotional compounds do. In this sense, we can see that if we can become addicts of heroin, nicotine, and alcohol, we can also reach an addiction of any kind of neuropeptides, or in other words, feelings, as they are all chemical compounds. Dependency is the result of the feeling of chemical urges, which flows through our body, signaling to our brain, where it automatically begins to give the command for action. If we wish to stop the action, it will start up our thoughts, which will in turn offer all sorts of explanations as to why it is not important or necessary to stop. If with my will I still stand in the way of satisfying the feelings of deficiency, anger will be induced, which is the fear that I will not get what I need. This will weaken my will. My mind will offer up to me yet another pile of reasons for giving in, and in many cases I will resume whatever I was attempting to refrain from. The same is true with our feelings. If we are under immense amount of stress or suffering, then always the same cell connections are formed and the entire process becomes automatic. Because if we use any kind of feelings too often, we can also become addicted to them. We will look for situations which will satisfy our cells' biochemical cravings. We will create these situations ourselves. It does not matter whether we are speaking of negative or positive emotions, whether concerning our sexualities or lust after danger. The same process can occur when we appreciate a piece of beautiful art or a flower bouquet. Different people maintain different focuses depending on their likes and dislikes, which in turn concentrates these biochemical processes on those certain things and make them feel a certain way according to them. So, what should we do to become more capable, balanced, and happy? We must know ourselves. We must gain knowledge, digest, and understand it. Realize what it is we are doing wrong within ourselves. We must desire change and take the appropriate steps towards it. A quote from Leo Tolstoy. There can only be one permanent revolution, a moral one. The regeneration of the inner man. How is this revolution to take place? Nobody knows how it will take place in humanity, but every man feels it clearly in himself. And yet, in our world, everybody thinks of changing humanity, and nobody thinks of changing himself. Our mission is to give an alternative viewpoint on life in this rapidly evolving moment in time. We feel there are many out there who have been waiting for such a message, which is why we poured our time, energy, and love into this project's manifestation, to aid humanity as well as ourselves in this transformation, to land together in a new, better reality, bathed in the sea of love and eternal unity. If you resonate with this message and would like to support our work, please feel free to share it with your community. Please subscribe, share, and like this video so the YouTube algorithm will suggest it to others interested in this topic. Thank you.